Your choice reveals a pattern you repeat when something in you feels touched, threatened, or quietly sad, and that is why this is more than a simple image test. The tree that pulls you first may show where your feelings learn to stop flowing and start protecting themselves. In a Jungian test, symbols often reach the truth before explanations do, because the mind likes neat stories while the deeper self speaks in pictures, moods, and small flashes of recognition. What looks like ice on branches can be the shape of an old defense, a way of staying composed when part of you is still waiting for warmth. This is why your first reaction matters. It can reveal where your emotional roots are still anchored in fear, memory, caution, or longing, even if you have not named it yet. Do not think too long now. Just look at the trees, feel the first pull, and pick one from 1 to 5. Stay with the first impression, instead of giving the decision to logic, because logic often arrives after the truth and tries to make it sound safer. In many Jung test moments, the symbol that unsettles you or attracts you first is not random at all. It is often the one that reflects a pattern you already live but rarely stop to notice. Maybe you protect yourself by keeping things light, maybe by thinking instead of feeling, maybe by becoming harder, maybe by delaying what you already know, or maybe by standing at the edge of change without letting yourself step forward. None of this means something is wrong with you. It only means your inner world found a way to survive, and now it may be asking for a gentler way to live. As we move through this, I will connect your choice to one clear and practical step you can actually take in everyday life, because insight matters most when it meets a real moment, a real conversation, a real habit, a real decision. At first, this may feel like you are only choosing a tree, but by the end you will understand that the image is really showing you a hidden emotional position, a place where your psyche learned to freeze, wait, or hold back. And only at the end will the full meaning open, because the first image is only the doorway. The deeper understanding comes later, when the symbol meets your own life. So stay close to what you feel now, even if you cannot explain it yet, because sometimes the part of you that chooses quickly is the part that has been waiting the longest to be seen. If you chose option 1, this often happens when feeling begins to rise, and one quiet part of you moves away before it becomes deep enough to change your day. Pay attention to this, because the first tree does not point to a lack of emotion, but to a gentle habit of keeping emotion thin, bright, moving, and safely unfinished. The image is a young tree under a fragile coat of frost, and that image matters because it shows a life that still wants warmth, yet has learned to survive by touching it lightly. In simple Jungian language, the light side of this pattern is charm, adaptability, and quick recovery, while the shadow hides the heavier weather that never got a safe place to land. Stay with me here, because people with this choice are often not cold at all. They are the kind of people who feel fast, read the room quickly, and then cover the feeling with motion, kindness, or usefulness. The simplified archetype here is the gentle evader, the person who learned that staying easy to love was safer than asking the room to hold sadness, anger, fear, or need. Maybe there was a time when strong emotion brought silence, embarrassment, conflict, or the feeling that you had become too much for someone important, and your system took note. After that, it may have felt wiser to stay pleasant, responsive, and bright than to let the deeper truth slow the room down and reveal how badly you needed care. You can see this in ordinary life when a friend disappoints you, and instead of pausing long enough to admit the sting, you smile a little, say it is fine, and move the moment past yourself. Or someone asks what is wrong, and you answer with a polished version that protects everyone, including you, while the truer feeling remains below the surface, waiting for one honest minute. Pay attention to this, because the cost of the pattern is easy to miss at first. The feelings you skim do not disappear. They gather at the edges and return later as restlessness, distance, or unnamed sadness. This is why the light in you can start to feel strangely performative, because it was trained to keep peace rather than to tell the truth about what the heart is carrying. Here is the kinder truth, though. This pattern did not begin as a flaw, it began as protection. And that matters because shame will only teach you to hide from yourself with more skill. Some part of you once believed that if you stayed bright, quick, and undemanding, you could keep love, keep stability, or at least keep yourself from drowning in the full weight of what you felt. Stay with me, Because healing for this choice does not begin by forcing intensity. It begins when you stop admiring your smoothness long enough to ask what your speed is protecting. Once you notice the mechanism, you start to see that distraction is not always freedom. Sometimes it is fear dressed in movement, and sometimes it is a polite way of abandoning your own inner weather. That recognition is powerful, because the moment you can see the pattern clearly, you are no longer inside it in the same blind way. And that means the shadow has already begun to lose some control. Today, when you feel the first urge to smile it away, open your phone, help someone else, or change the subject. Stop where you are and set a timer for 10 full minutes. Write one plain sentence that begins with, "I feel," and name only the feeling beneath the performance, not the story, not the reason, not what the other person meant, just the living word. Then stay there until the body softens a little and you realize that being honest for one quiet moment is not the same as being unsafe and never was. That is the beginning of real warmth, not the kind that performs for the room, but the kind that finally reaches you too inside. If you chose option 2, this usually appears when you come very close to your feelings, but stop at the edge and turn them into thoughts before they can fully enter the body. Stay with me, because this pattern is more subtle than it looks. The second tree stands behind cloudy ice, visible yet blurred, and that image says everything. You are not cut off from yourself. You can see what is there, you can name it, you can even explain it with unusual clarity. But there is often a quiet inner conflict between desire and fear. One part of you wants the truth because truth feels clean, honest, and relieving. Another part fears what truth will demand once it is truly felt. In simple Jungian language, the persona becomes thoughtful, calm, articulate, and self-aware, while the shadow holds the raw emotion that still has not been lived all the way through. Pay attention to this, because the gift in this pattern is real. You can reflect deeply. You can read situations well. You often understand motives, tensions, and hidden meanings before other people do. But the cost can become painful in private, because understanding is not the same as contact. You may describe sadness instead of grieving, describe anger instead of admitting you were hurt, describe longing instead of risking need. That is the inner mechanism here. The mind steps in and translates feeling into something safer, something shaped, something that can be observed without being surrendered to. And for a while that works. It keeps life orderly, it keeps the face composed, it even makes you seem wise. But the body keeps the unfinished part. The chest stays tight, the jaw stays guarded. The evening feels heavier than the morning without any obvious reason. Here is where the gentle tension rises. The more accurate your explanation becomes, the easier it is to believe you have already dealt with the feeling. But beneath the analysis, something in you is still waiting, still there, still asking. Imagine a simple, everyday scene. You have a difficult conversation with someone you care about. They say something that sounds casual to them, but it lands sharply in you. In the moment, you stay calm. Later, while making tea or driving home or standing under the shower, your mind begins arranging the whole thing. You tell yourself why they said it, what they probably meant, how your reaction connects to the past, how this fits a larger pattern. The interpretation becomes elegant. It almost feels complete. Then comes the quiet mini-climax. The room goes still, and underneath all the explanations there is one plain feeling you have not touched at all. Not theory, not insight, just hurt, or fear, or disappointment. In that moment, the image of the frozen tree becomes personal, because the frost is not ignorance. It is protection. The shadow does not hide because you are weak. It hides because at some point, feeling directly may have seemed more dangerous than understanding from a distance. That is why this choice deserves gentleness, not shame. You are not empty. You are defended through intelligence. And now the task is not to lose your insight, but to let insight open the door instead of standing in front of it forever. See what this changes. The goal is not less thought. The goal is more honesty inside thought. The goal is to let the feeling exist before the explanation organizes it into safety. Today, set a timer for 15 minutes, sit alone without music or your phone, and write one sentence that begins with, "I feel." Keep writing only from that doorway for the full 15 minutes. Each time you begin explaining, Return to the feeling itself. Not the reason, not the history, not what the other person intended, just the living emotion in simple words until one true sentence appears and the distance between your mind and your heart becomes smaller than it was before. If you chose 3, this usually begins after a moment when trust felt expensive and showing pain seemed more dangerous than staying composed. That is the emotional cause under this choice. The third tree stands like a dark trunk sealed in ice, and it mirrors a pattern that can look strong from the outside while hiding a quieter form of avoidance underneath. In Jungian language, the persona learns to become reliable, efficient, calm, and hard to read, because somewhere in the past, softness did not feel protected enough to survive in the open. Stay with me here, because this is not the story of a person who feels less. It is the story of someone who learned to turn feeling into control before it could become need. Here is the unexpected twist. What you call discipline may sometimes be self-protection wearing the face of maturity. And because it looks admirable, the pattern can repeat for years without being questioned. Imagine an ordinary workday. You promise to finish something by the afternoon, and you do. You answer messages, solve problems, carry your part, and keep moving. Then someone forgets a commitment they made to you, something small on the surface, but important enough to leave a mark. You notice the sting instantly. Yet instead of saying it mattered, the persona steps forward and says, "Nothing is wrong." You stay productive. You become even more precise. You speak less. The shadow takes the hurt and locks it below the surface, where it slowly changes shape. Later that evening, the silence feels heavier than it should. You tell yourself you are simply tired, but the truth is that a deeper part of you is reacting to disappointment the old way, by hardening before anyone can see the bruise. See what happens next. That same pattern begins following you into other rooms. In relationships, you become dependable but harder to reach. In decisions, you act quickly on practical things, but delay the choices that would expose what you really want. In everyday life, you keep promises to everyone else while quietly stepping around the promises that would ask for emotional honesty from you. That is why this option matters. The frozen tree is not only a symbol of endurance, it is also a symbol of rooted feeling trapped inside a form that no longer knows how to bend. The light side of this pattern is powerful. You can carry responsibility, you can stay upright under pressure, you can do what needs to be done. But the shadow grows when strength becomes the only acceptable identity, because then every softer impulse begins to look like weakness, and every honest need begins to feel like a threat to the image you have learned to protect. Pay attention to that, because avoidance here does not look dramatic. It looks competent. It looks calm. It looks like a person who always follows through, while inside there is a quiet fear that if you truly admit what mattered, you might lose control of the whole inner structure. The mini-climax comes when you realize that keeping your word to others has sometimes become a way of not having to make the more personal decision that would change your life. It is easier to complete tasks than to tell the truth. Easier to stay useful than to say this hurt me or this matters or this is no longer enough. Once you see that, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore, because the very quality that made you admirable has also kept you emotionally alone at crucial moments. That does not make your strength false. It means your strength is ready to become more complete. Today, choose one decision you have delayed because it requires clarity. Write the next concrete step in one sentence. Set a timer for 15 minutes and complete that step before the day ends without changing the plan halfway through. Let the action be visible and final. Keep the promise. Not to the persona this time, but to the deeper self that has been waiting for a form of strength that does not freeze the truth in order to survive. If you chose 4, this often appears when part of you wants to surrender to what is true, but another part is afraid that the moment you do, you will lose something you still hope to keep. That is the tension hidden inside this choice. The 4th tree is not frozen solid, and it is not fully free either. It is caught in between with ice beginning to melt, while the branches still hold themselves carefully, as if movement itself could cost too much. Stay with me, because this pattern is rarely about confusion alone. More often it is about control trying to protect you from the grief that might come with a clear answer. In simple Jungian language, The shadow here holds the truth that has already formed inside you, the feeling, the need, the no, the yes, the quiet certainty you keep postponing. The limitation is not that you do not know enough. The limitation is that fear of change keeps dressing itself up as patience, prudence, timing, or maturity. You recognize this more often than you usually admit to yourself, because there are moments when you already know what you feel, but you keep one hand on the old life just in case the new one disappoints you. Pay attention to this image. A tree with melting ice is alive in a very particular way. It is not dead, and it is not settled. Something in it is already shifting, and that is why this option carries such emotional tension. You may have spent a long time trying to keep things manageable, readable, under control, but underneath that, there is often a deeper fear that once the ice fully loosens, you will have to let go of a version of safety that no longer fits you. That fear can take many forms. Fear of losing a relationship if you speak clearly. Fear of losing approval if you change direction. Fear of losing the familiar structure of your days if you finally choose what you really want. The persona in this pattern often looks calm, thoughtful, responsible, almost admirably careful. But the shadow knows something else. It knows how much energy it takes to stay suspended between longing and action. It knows how exhausting it is to rehearse a truth without living it. Here is a very ordinary scene. Someone asks you a simple question that is not simple at all. Are you still in this relationship? Do you want this job? Are you coming or not? Do you want to keep doing life this way? And instead of answering, you soften the edges. You say you need more time. You say things are complicated. You say now is not the right moment. Then the day goes on. You make dinner. You reply to messages. You continue being functional. But something inside you has tightened. The real tension does not end when the conversation ends. It follows you into the kitchen, into the shower, into the silence before sleep. That is the mini-climax of this option. The hardest part is not the decision itself. The hardest part is knowing that the undecided state has become its own prison and still calling it safety. See what this pattern does over time. It makes you live in half commitments, half grief, half hope, half honesty. You stay near the door of change without stepping through it, and because nothing fully breaks, nothing fully begins. That is why this choice can feel so personal. It speaks to people who are not passive at all. In fact, many of them are deeply capable. They manage a lot. They carry a lot. They think carefully. But when the soul asks for a clean answer, the old fear rises and says, not yet. What if you regret it? What if you lose too much? What if saying yes changes everything? What if saying no finally ends the story you were still bargaining with? The deeper truth is that you may already be losing something by waiting. Not always a person or an opportunity, but your own clarity, your own energy, your own self-trust. So do not reduce this pattern to indecision. It is more intimate than that. It is the emotional habit of protecting yourself from change by staying in negotiation with reality after reality has already spoken. And once you see that, something becomes possible. The moment stops being only about fear. It becomes about dignity. It becomes about whether you will keep abandoning your deeper knowing in the name of staying safe. Today, choose one delayed situation that has been living in your mind for too long. Set a timer for 20 minutes and give it one answer only, yes or no, without adding conditions, without softening the truth, and without reopening the question after you decide. Let the answer stand. Let it feel real. Let your body learn that clarity may shake you for a moment, but it also returns something that delay slowly steals, which is the feeling that your life is actually in your hands. If you chose 5, something in you is already leaning toward transformation, even if another part is still trying to call it caution. This choice usually appears when momentum has started under the surface, and the old form of your life can no longer hold what is growing inside it. Pay attention to that, because option 5 is not about chaos for its own sake. It is about the quiet moment when repeating the same pattern becomes more painful than changing it. The tree in ice carries that exact tension. Its shape is still there, but the freeze around it is beginning to fail. What once kept everything fixed now also reveals the pressure of life underneath. In simple Jungian language, this is close to individuation, the courage to stop living as separate pieces and begin integrating what you have hidden, postponed, softened, or split off in order to stay manageable. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming harder to divide from yourself. Stay with me here, because this pattern has more force than it first appears to have. Many people think transformation begins with certainty, but that is rarely true. More often it begins with friction. One side of you wants the familiar story, because the familiar story has rules, routines, and excuses that already know your name. Another side has started to feel restless inside that same safety. That restlessness is not failure. It is often the first sign that the deeper self is no longer willing to remain frozen in a role that once protected you, but now limits you. The shadow here is not only fear, it is also the unlived version of your own life, the conversation you keep delaying, the decision you keep rehearsing, the routine you keep repeating long after it has stopped feeling alive. And because that shadow keeps gathering energy, this choice often arrives for people who are tired of almost beginning. You can see it in a very ordinary scene. You wake up already thinking about the message you need to send or the conversation you need to have. You tell yourself you will do it after work. Then work ends, and you say maybe after dinner. Then the evening comes, and you do what you always do. You take the same route home. You open the same app. You sit in the same chair. You replay the same reasons to wait. On the surface, it looks like hesitation, but underneath it is something sharper. You already know what needs to change. You are simply standing at the threshold, feeling the cost of becoming someone who acts on what they know. That is the small internal climax hidden inside option 5. The real fear is not only that change will go badly. The real fear is that once you move, you will no longer be able to pretend you are still undecided. The older self loses its favorite hiding place the moment your action becomes real. This is why the tone of this choice feels stronger. It is not pushing you toward some dramatic reinvention. It is asking whether you are willing to let truth gather enough momentum to become visible. Individuation in its simplest form is exactly that. It is courage joined with integration. It is the moment when your inner life and your outer life stop fighting each other so much. It is when desire is allowed to speak without being immediately covered by fear. It is when the person who knows and the person who acts start becoming the same person. That does not happen through a perfect plan. It happens through one real step that breaks the mold of repetition. So do not dismiss this choice as impatience or fantasy. It often appears when the psyche is done asking softly. The frozen tree is not only a symbol of what has been held back, it is also a symbol of pressure building toward movement. And movement changes identity faster than analysis does. Once you act, even in a small way, the old pattern is no longer the only path available to you. That is why this choice matters so much. It marks the place where your life stops waiting for permission and starts asking for participation. Today, choose the one decision or conversation you have delayed the longest. Write a message of no more than 20 words that makes your next step unmistakably real, and send it before the day ends. Let it be small, clear, and irreversible. Do not soften it into maybe. Do not hide it inside politeness or delay. Send it and let your body feel what follows, because the instant that message leaves your hands, something changes inside you. Momentum stops being an idea. It becomes a fact. And once that happens, the mold is already broken, even if only by a crack at first. That crack is enough. Light enters through small openings long before the whole structure falls away. What all 5 choices share is a quiet pattern that many people live without naming. In different ways, each tree reveals avoidance, not because you are weak and not because you do not care, but because some part of you learned that certain feelings were easier to postpone than to face directly. One person avoids by staying light, another by turning feeling into thought, another by becoming harder, another by delaying the truth, and another by waiting at the edge of change until movement becomes unavoidable. The forms are different, but the structure is the same. Something real rises inside you, fear answers it, and then the psyche repeats an old strategy that once helped you survive. This is why the symbolism matters. A tree speaks of roots, growth, memory, seasons, and the hidden life below what other people can see. Ice speaks of feeling held still, of emotion suspended rather than gone. In simple Jungian language, The persona is the part of you that learns how to function, smile, decide, stay useful and remain acceptable, while the shadow carries what felt too dangerous, too messy, too vulnerable, or too painful to bring fully into the light. That does not make the shadow bad. It makes it human. It is often where your unlived truth waits. And that is why the same kind of difficulty can keep repeating in new forms, in relationships, in work, in routines, in silences, in messages not sent, in conversations postponed, and in the moments when you tell yourself you're only tired or careful or busy, when something deeper is actually asking to be felt. Stay with that, because this is where the ending becomes meaningful. The common fear under all 5 patterns is not just fear of pain. It is fear of what might happen if you truly change. Fear of losing control, fear of losing approval, fear of losing a familiar identity, fear of losing the old story that has explained your life for so long. But the hidden cost of repeating the pattern is that you also lose contact with the part of yourself that wants to grow beyond it. That is where integration begins. In a simple Jungian sense, integration means that the parts of you that were split apart for protection begin to belong to the same life again. The feeling is no longer exiled. The fear is no longer running the whole room in silence. The symbol is no longer only a mirror, it becomes a threshold. So this is a completion, because now you can see the pattern more clearly than before, and what is seen clearly begins to lose some of its automatic power. But it is also a new beginning, because seeing is only the first movement. The real test starts after this video when life gives you an ordinary moment and the old reflex returns. That is when you will recognize whether you are about to avoid, repeat, hide, or finally choose differently. And that moment matters more than any description, because it is where self-knowledge stops being an idea and becomes a lived act. Today, when you notice yourself about to freeze a feeling, delay a truth, hide behind explanation, harden your tone, or drift away from what is real, pause for 2 full minutes and choose one honest action before the day ends. Send the message. Give the answer. Keep the promise. Speak the truth in one plain sentence. Let the act be small, but let it be real. Because every time you do that, you teach your inner world that presence is stronger than repetition, that fear can be felt without being obeyed, and that growth begins the moment your roots stop clinging only to the old winter and start trusting that another season is possible. If this touched something real in you, do not leave it here without answering it in your own voice. Leave your number in the comments. Please enter your name. Like this. Subscribe. Watch the next test on your screen right now. Let this be simple and honest, because sometimes the smallest response is the one that keeps the feeling alive a little longer and helps you stay close to what you just understood. You do not need the perfect words. You only need one true moment that says, "This reached me, this was mine, this is where I begin again." There is something quietly powerful about naming your choice before the mind turns away from it and makes it smaller than it felt a minute ago. So stay with what opened in you and leave that small trace of yourself here while it is still warm and real. The point is not to impress anyone. The point is to remain with yourself for one more breath and not step back into silence too quickly. Some endings are really invitations, and this one is asking for a very gentle kind of courage, the kind that does not shout but still moves the next part of your life forward. If you felt seen, let yourself answer. If something in you softened, let yourself mark the moment. If this stirred a truth you have been carrying quietly, let that truth have one visible shape before the screen changes and the night continues around you. I want this to feel less like a request and more like a hand reaching back toward you after a long inner walk, reminding you that what you felt here matters and that your inner world deserves an answer while it is still awake. Do not disappear from your own insight now. Remain in it for a second longer. Leave your number in the comments. Please enter your name. Like this. Subscribe. Watch the next test on your screen right now and carry this feeling with you, not as a dramatic promise, but as one honest sign that you were here. You recognized yourself, and you chose not to look away at the very end. Because that quiet choice matters more than it seems, and sometimes the smallest act of response becomes the first real movement after a long time of standing still. Let this be that movement for you now, and let the next test meet the part of you that is already a little more awake than before.